adored the Castlevania series, and once it faded into something I couldn't recognize anymore, I eventually found Demon Souls, and then here we are. The Shaded Castle could easily pass as an area found in Castlevania, with wide enemy variations, fun platforming, and a challenging, versatile boss. I wasn't sure how I would approach this because I haven't reviewed a level before, so I'm going to write what I feel is important for an audit. I need to address that I will not be discussing the lore of this area, only due to the fact that it's an aspect I personally do not invest my time into. This is only an analysis of the level design and combat. Types of items will not be mentioned or considered as a negative point due to items being valuable in many different ways. So it would be unfair for me to say something is useless or not rewarding when anyone may find the treasure viable for their playthrough. In order to get as much out of the Shaded Castle in a respectable manner, I defeated every single enemy with my preferred playstyle. Discovering this location is very exciting, and at first glance the castle seems so small, however packs a ton for its initial impression. A castle surrounded by a moat of poison that contains basilisks, Miranda flowers, slugs, and putrid corpses. I do wish there were enemies that complemented this section more, such as aggressive enemy archers on horseback properly guarding the entrances. That way gaining the way in was more rewarding and thought-provoking. Before we enter the Shaded Castle, I want to bring up an hostile NPC named Maleigh, Marais Shaded Castle Castellan. Hence the name. This scenario has half-baked. The NPC detection boundaries is extremely exploitable and really should have been encased in a fog arena because the combat concept is actually very interesting. In the existing encounter, you have a golem that activates once the NPC is aggressive, and it takes the golem maybe a minute to reach you. The way I would have made this more of a serious encounter in respect of the recommended ruin level is set up the scenario like the golem is a countdown to chaos, because you don't want the mess these two can bring when tackling them at the same time, since you would be facing fast and slow plus out of view combat. There are a few ways into the Shaded Castle. One is the main opening containing the Site of Grace, the second takes you straight to the Miranda Flower, and the third allows you to have a faster upper hand against Depraved Perfumers. This enemy type is brutal, with aggressive projectiles and retreats. This specific scenario is fun because I can use stealth. The interesting thing about this enemy type is you'll have a decent start of how Moog works, since he has two projectile attacks that are very similar to the Depraved Perfumers with vertical and horizontal spray type projectiles. This led me into one of my favorite moments in the Shaded Castle during my thorough analysis. Every section containing Depraved Perfumers can be accomplished with 100% stealth, and it gets progressively more difficult to execute. I need to state that I didn't use stealth enhancement equipment such as attire, talismans, or enhancement items. There are 3 sections which each contain 2 Depraved Perfumers. The first scenario is more effective from the right side opening that's short enough to jump into with Torrent. If you do this immediately after resting at a Site of Grace, the Depraved Perfumer here should have its back turned towards you, allowing a posterior critical strike, then follow up with a heavy fully charged attack. Heading back, you have some steps leading to the second Depraved Perfumer. However, there's a surprise putrid corpse, so I made sure to position back and to the left. Using a bow triggers light attention from the Depraved Perfumers, and you can quickly defeat the putrid corpse, and then perform the same maneuver as before. The second scenario is a bit more complicated, however I was very intrigued by the results. Sitting on the rooftop of a sunken building we have our Depraved Perfumer just sitting there. The Depraved Perfumer will stand up whenever you get close enough and out of sight, then it continues to patrol back and forth. So remain hidden until its back is turned for the approach. The second Depraved Perfumer has a light trigger whenever you start to cross the bridge. It will walk to the end of the bridge and just stand there without patrolling. I couldn't simply jump on the bridge and approach because it would trigger full attention. There just happens to be some rocks that can be jumped on to reach the area that wraps around to the Depraved Perfumer. The biggest downside are the putrid corpses that can grab and spit poison. After getting past all of those guys, I was successfully able to achieve a stealth attack. The third and final scenario is my favorite out of the three. For this one, I used one of the ladders that needs to be kicked down. With that available, I can climb up shortly after the site of grace. Now the Depraved Perfumer, hidden on the left, needs to be triggered, so climbing all the way up does this. However, I had to quickly climb back down enough to avoid full attention. Then there's the opportunity. Further down this path contains two Depraved Perfumers, and obviously I couldn't strike one and be successful, so this is where my bow comes into play. There are some of what I assume to be sandbags conveniently placed, allowing me to jump on top of the wall here. I aim to shoot to trigger the light attention. Now I want the Depraved Perfumer to be walking back at a reasonable distance, so the other still doesn't gain full attention. So I made sure this one stopped and turned around at the best moment. Then that's simply it. I wish there were more of these guys in the Shaded Castle, especially for the last section, because this was incredibly interesting to figure out. The next segment is the two Revenants that show up, and I'm sure most people can agree that these guys are not exactly well loved due to their atrociously aggressive moveset, with very little room to react. I'm aware of a certain magic spell that apparently rids the Revenants, however that's not my style, especially for this video. Whenever combat design gets this quirky, I strategize around the level design as my offense and defense. In this case, I will be utilizing defensive maneuvers to remove the Revenants. The first Revenant I'll go over is the one guarding the Somber Smithing Stone Grade 5, which spawns when you enter that small general area. Thankfully for my strategy, the Revenant spawns at the end of the rooftop here, where the entire fight will take place. One very useful aspect about the Revenants is that their respawning is very restrictive, and they don't handle elevation very well at all. Once the Revenant gets stuck here, and depending on your weapon, you can strike the Revenant at your best convenience, with the only concern being the poison attack that only lingers for a few seconds. And there's actually a rare chance that the Revenant may actually respawn on the rooftop, but that only happened to me once out of the several attempts I made. The second Revenant is a little trickier. First I trigger the spawning point, then I run up to the bridge with the Cleanrot Knight. With the bridge cleared, I have a full advantage point of the Revenant. Lock-on doesn't work very well here, so manual aim is recommended. Overall, figuring this out was immensely entertaining, and it's thanks to the convenient level design, either if it was on purpose or not. It definitely made fighting a Revenant fun for once. There are 3 Cleanrot Knights in the Shaded Castle. Each one has a different challenge to overcome. The first one that guards a chest is resting and can be quickly handled with a posterior approach, then you have a nice upper hand. This interaction is pretty basic compared to the rest. The second encounter is the one on the other side of the bridge where I defeated the second Revenant. Typically, this Cleanrot Knight uses the disc projectiles appropriately considering its surroundings. Then you can proceed once you've gained your footing. The third encounter has a stealth opportunity. It seems risky due to the dogs, however there's only 3, and they typically don't trigger if you wait for the Cleanrot Knight to have his back turned for a posterior approach. This segment took me by surprise. The Rotten Miranda sprout that's tucked away in a corner, also containing smaller sprouts and putrid corpses, surprisingly works very well as one contained encounter. Tackling the putrid corpses on the roof can be problematic due to the giant Miranda sprout's pillars of light attack, which has a fantastic sound and animation cue. I found that running straight to the back first to start on the smaller sprouts and running to the other end when the pillars of light initiates while taking care of the occasional putrid corpse works out as a very interesting and engaging challenge. The Basilisk placement in the Shaded Castle is very forgettable, and one section in particular doesn't resonate with me at all at baseline value. I do appreciate that a few of them climb out of the ground, and shooting them with a bow is fun at least. Basilisks work in claustrophobic settings like in tunnels and hazardous platforming. They do not work in open areas such as this, especially with a moveset that hasn't changed since Dark Souls. I was about to write off the Wraithcallers as an uneventful implementation. However, I remembered that these guys are here to catch you climbing the ladders. This is most noticeable in the area just before the second bonfire, where they are placed very cleverly. One on the ground, one on the roof, and one partially hidden. The Wraithcallers on horseback would be better for this if the AI wasn't poorly designed. When this variation is activated for aggression, they trot around aimlessly while running into walls, corners, and random objects. The 2 in the Shaded Castle certainly doesn't work. The final section of the Shaded Castle leading to Elemer the Briar is where I personally prefer to run, because it becomes a very engaging obstacle course with some fun maneuvers. We also see several enemies that were not present prior. The first thing we see are dogs sleeping that wake up very slowly. Then after that is a combination of wandering noble types and a sneaky page. Right outside is a feasting dog that surprisingly isn't too problematic. Then of course the lesser Cleanrot Knight that we have covered earlier. With this run, there is a convenient ramp that's perfect to jump and run off of, but there's a fairly high chance the lesser Cleanrot Knight can mess that up. The following room contains a hidden wandering noble and a page at the top of the stairs. The final stretch with the lesser Cleanrot Knight and some dogs is a great finale, especially when you activate the elevator just right, and sometimes the lesser Cleanrot Knight falls down the shaft. It never gets old. We now have Elemer of the Briar that has one of the most memorable Foggate entrances with beautiful statues staring you down as if you have an audience. The Elemer of the Briar is one of my favorite boss fights in Elden Ring, and I'm so glad I can fight them several times I played through, and I was immensely disappointed bell-bearing hunters did not make an appearance in the Shadow of the Erdtree, where they could have dropped blessings. I will now go over each attack Elemer of the Briar uses. There are no differences between variations in terms of the moveset. Basic attacks serves as many incredible factors such as parrying, combos, special switching, and dodge rhythm. When close, these attacks occur about 90% of the time. However, that does change if you gain distance, then it switches to more dancing blade attacks. This often occurrence is one of the biggest downsides due to some attacks being absent, such as the drilling blade and the shield charge. The attacks are also very well telegraphed and are not obnoxiously mixed in delays like many attacks throughout Elden Ring. Shield charge. Unfortunately, this is a distance-based attack. I think it could have been just fine as a close range attack since the telegraph is good and also has a decent punish window. I guess the best outcome for this design choice is that it does throw me off when it happens because I often forget it's an attack. It also could have been good for gaining distance away from the player so more attacks could be present. Shield Slam is one of the most interesting attacks with 2 variants, one containing an AoE and the other doesn't. Thankfully, there is a distinguishing detail in the telegraph, which is an animation speed. The slower animation indicates no AoE, while the faster animation indicates the AoE. This attack has the tendency to repeat multiple times if you position yourself behind Elemer the Briar, and with this attack having one of the most generous punish windows, It can be a great form of strategy. The AoE is great to follow up with a parry since the majority of the time has a basic attack follow-up. Dancing Blade can be very overwhelming at first, but you basically need to visualize a large whip, and it makes sense damage detection wise. This weapon status does blend into basic attacks, which was one of the last refinements I needed personally because I kept forgetting that it happens and the telegraph seems to happen almost too quickly, especially if you're not expecting it. If you dodge with the anticipation of a basic swing, then it's too late, and you're taking a hit. I realize it's all about the right timings, of course, but I still rather get annoyed getting struck by one of these attacks because it drastically changes the dodge rhythm. The 3-swing combo can especially be off-putting. There is a no-roll strategy for evading these attacks, but I don't recommend it unless you enjoy the camera spinning around a lot. Drilling Blade has the best punish window due to the player tracking being very low, so you can perform a lot of critical hits. However, this attack is seemingly rare, but like the shield charge, is distance-based. Even if you perform something like a bow-only fight, the attack still rarely occurs, but the shield charge is much more prevalent. If you're a seasoned From Software veteran, then you know a grab attack when you see one. Like the AoE variant of the shield slam, the punish window is slim and typically follows up with a basic attack encouraging a parry. It's one attack that I do prefer to run out of because it's more thrilling. As a bonus, since this video has some Castlevania tones, I want to mention an observation I made while going down memory lane. In Castlevania Curse of Darkness, there is a boss named Dullahan that has a striking resemblance to the combat design found in Elemer of the Briar. The swings, the AoEs, the shield charge, and the drilling blade makes me wonder if someone in From Software is a fan so they could use Dullahan as an inspiration. Dullahan was one of my first exposures to harsh but fair boss designs, so it's amazing seeing a combat resemblance in one of my favorite games of all time. I asked several people about their opinion on the Shaded Castle. Shockingly, it was mostly negative. The only praise was Elemer of the Briar. No one even mentioned the enemy encounters or the level design. The only items I ever hear about from the Shaded Castle are, of course, the weapons and armor obtained. I wonder what could inspire players to explore enemy encounters. Fog domes, notes describing a challenge, or linear design. The biggest enemy encounter I typically hear from players is the Hero Graves dungeons because the chariots are a constant threat that doesn't go away immediately from being overpowered or simply running away. It actually promotes baseline problem solving. Before I go on into a totally different subject, I'm going to end it here. Hopefully I was able to respectfully showcase one of my favorite areas in Elden Ring, and if there's something you think I missed that's worth looking into, then please share. Thank you for listening, and remember to practice for perfection.